Aloha, welcome to the Mr.G podcast. This is episode 32. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about free will versus faith. Which is it? Do we have free will or is everything predetermined? On yesterday's podcast, episode 31, we went over nature versus nurture. How much of us and our personalities and who we are is determined by nature and how much of it is determined by nurture. That topic on yesterday's podcast, episode 31, was important to me because I have a fraternal twin brother and I have two older sisters who are also twins. They've done lots of studies with nature and nurture and twins, with identical twins and fraternal twins. Today, it's about 7:45 here on the outskirts of Chinatown in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a sizzling, sweaty 78 degrees out here in my city. Like I said, today's episode, we're going to be talking about free will versus fate. First off, I'm going to tell you that I'm in the camp of free will. I believe that we have free will and we determine where our life leads. Some of it might be predetermined, but most of it, I'm in the proponent of free will. And I had a pastor at a Seventh-day Adventist church, and we had a few discussions on free will. And the main reason that I am with free will is I think that there's an ongoing constant battle between good and evil, and the malevolence that I see in humans are unlike anything else in nature, and that's the devil. That's the evil, whatever you want to call it. And so I see the battle between good and evil, and that's where free will comes in. However, my pastor was in the camp that everything is predetermined. Well, then I asked, why do horrible things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? And, his answer, and many religious people's answer, is we don't understand God's plan. And God has a reason for doing everything, and everything leads to something else. But I can't be satisfied with that response. However, one thing that astrophysicist, scientist, one of the smartest people in the world, Sabrine Hossenfelder, probably an atheist or an agnostic, I'm not sure. But one thing that she and my pastor at the church I went to have in common is they both agree that there is no such thing as free will and that everything is predetermined. Now, Sabine Hossenfelder is a very intelligent person. She has a YouTube channel. I would encourage you to go to her channel. I'll put a link in the description of this podcast. But something like free will, like what is for lunch? Am I going to have pizza for lunch, or am I going to have a hamburger for lunch? That's what most people would consider free will, the different possibilities. However, in science, a differential equation states that all laws of nature that we currently know follow these exact equations, differential equations. And if you have an initial condition at one moment in time, you can predict that condition at any moment in time of any particle. And our brains are made of particles. So when you take yourself, put it at a bird's eye perspective on somebody studying us, an outside organism, they are able to predict everything that we're going to do and everything that is going to happen with every single organism. And that's the laws of science. An example, like I said, an exact detail of all the particles in your brain and all of the brain's inputs, that you can calculate what's going to happen, what thought you're going to have, and what you're going to do at any moment in time. The whole story of the universe, every single detail, all the events, all the matter, was predetermined at the moment of the Big Bang, and we're just watching it all play out. And I do agree with that portion of free will and of Sabine Hossenfelder's hypothesis. All the matter that you see in the universe was all created at one moment during the Big Bang. It just changes form. So, certain carbon that we're made out of and certain elements that are inside of us originally came from stars during the Big Bang and the formation of galaxies. Now, quantum entanglement has a little bit to do with this as well, where two different where something that you do on this planet could have an effect, light years away, thousands of light years away, on a another planet. But as far as deterministic laws of nature, they apply to you and your brain because you're made of particles. What happens to you is a consequence of what happens to these particles. Some people would call this materialism, or reductionism. And that's a philosophical position. We're not talking about neurology either here. Neurology is, determining whether your brain knows what you're going to decide before you actually decide it. We're not talking about that as well. We're all equipped with a brain to use and collect information, and we act on what is learned. But the result of that thinking is already determined. You have to do the thinking, however, and you want to be curious about where the thinking is going to lead you. So you do have to do the thinking, but whatever thinking that you're going to think is already predetermined and can be determined with deterministic laws of nature. Now, there is quantum mechanics, and in quantum mechanics, that is one place where you will find fundamentally random events, and everybody seems to agree about this. But also, it doesn't have anything to do with you. It's not influenced by you. It's sometimes influenced by the viewer, as far as the double slit experiment that comes to mind. But you would call this determinism with the occasional quantum jump. So quantum mechanics is somewhere where we do see free will, but that's the free will of the quantum world. And free will, it's incompatible with laws of natures. It's logically incoherent, according to Dr. Hossenfelter. It's logically incoherent, and it doesn't follow the laws of nature. So with free will, we think about what we're going to do, but we have an ability to think about what we're going to do, but we have an inability to predict the result until we are done with that action. And we're all running software to optimize our well-being. So I totally agree with a lot of what Sabine Hossenfelter says. But once again, I can't go away from the fact that we have free will, and there's an ongoing battle between good and evil. Now, according to Wikipedia, free will is the notional capacity of ability to choose between different possible courses of action unimpeded. Free will is closely linked to the concepts of moral responsibility, praise, culpability, sin, and other judgments which apply only to actions that are freely chosen. It is also connected with the concepts of advice, persuasion, deliberation, and prohibition. Traditionally, only actions that are freely willed are seen as deserving credit or blame. Whether free will exists, what it is, and the implications on whether it exists or not are some of the longest running debates in philosophy and religion. Some conceive of free will as the ability to act beyond the limits of external influences or wishes. Some conceive free will to be the capacity to make choices undetermined by past events. Determinism suggests that only one course of events is possible, which is consistent with the libertarian model of free will. Ancient Greek philosophy identified this issue, which remains a major focus of philosophical debate. The view that conceives free will as incompatible with determinism is called incompatibilism, and encompasses both metaphysical libertarianism, to claim that determinism is false and thus free will is at least possible, and hard determinism, the claim that determinism is false and thus free will is not possible. Incompatibilism. In contrast, the history of free will. The problem of free will has been identified in ancient Greek philosophical literature. The notion of the compatibilist free will has been attributed to both Aristotle in the 4th century and Epictetus in the 1st century. It was the fact that nothing hindered us from doing or choosing something that made us have control. According to Susan Babazin, the notion of incompatible free will is perhaps first identified in the works of Alexander of Afrasiab in the 3rd century. What makes us have control over the things is the fact that we are casually underdetermined in our decision and thus can freely decide between doing, choosing, or not doing or choosing them. So it's kind of our mind playing a trick on us. The term free will was introduced by Christian philosopher by a Christian philosopher. It was traditionally meant, with the Enlightenment proposed its own meanings, lack of necessity in human will, so that the will is free, meant the will does not have to be as it is. This requirement was universally embraced by both sides of the argument. Now, Western philosophy. The underlying question on whether we have control of our actions, and if so, what sort of control and to what extent. These questions predate the early Greek Stoics, and some modern philosophers lament the lack of progress over all of these centuries. So the lack of progress over this argument, do we have free will, or are things predetermined? How does that work within the matrix? Are we in a hologram? Are we in a simulation? We wouldn't really have free will then, would we? It's difficult to reconcile the intuitive evidence that conscious decisions are causally effective with the view that the physical world can be explained entirely by physical law. The conflict between intuitively felt freedom and natural law arises when either causal closure or physical determinism is asserted. With causal closure, no physical event has a cause outside the physical domain, and with physical determinism, the future is determined entirely by preceding events. The puzzle of reconciling free will with a deterministic universe is known as the problem of free will, or sometimes referred to as the dilemma of determinism. This dilemma leads to a moral dilemma as well, the question of how to assign responsibility for actions if they are caused entirely by past events. Compatibilists maintain that mental reality is not of itself causally effective. Classical compatibilists have addressed the dilemma of free will by arguing that free will holds as long as humans are not externally constrained or coerced. Modern compatibilists make a distinction between freedom of will and freedom of action, that is, separating freedom of choice from the freedom to enact it. Given that humans all experience a sense of free will, some modern compatibilists think it is necessary to accommodate this intuition. Compatibilists often associate free will with the ability to make rational decisions. So I don't think that we'll ever, maybe in the near future with quantum computers and aliens, will determine whether or not we have free will. A different approach to the dilemma is that, namely, that if the world is deterministic, then our feeling that we are free to choose an action is simply an illusion. Free will here is predominantly treated with respect to physical determinism in the strict sense of nomological determinism, although other forms of determinism are also relevant for free will. Now, most people, believe it or not, theology in the church and in science would say that we don't have free will. So experts really, are solid on that point. They're not wavering that we do not have free will. Destiny and fate from Wikipedia. Destiny or fate is a predetermined course of events. It may be conceived as a predetermined future, whether in general or of an individual. It is a concept based on the belief that there is a fixed natural order to the cosmos. I kind of believe that as well. I believe there's free will and there's a natural order to the cosmos. Although often used interchangeably, the words fate and destiny have distinct connotations. Fate generally implies that there is a set course that cannot be deviated from, and over which one has no control. Fate is related to determinism, but makes no specific claim of physical determinism. Even with physical indeterminism, an event could still be fated externally. Destiny likewise is related to determinism, but makes no specific claim of physical determinism. Even with physical indeterminism, an event could still be destined to occur. Destiny applies that there's a set course that cannot be deviated from, but does not of itself make any claim with respect to the setting of that course. An example, it does not necessarily conflict with incompatibilist free will. Free will, if existent, could be the mechanism by which the destined outcome is chosen. So basically destiny, it's not necessarily incompatible with free will. You can still have destiny and you can still have free will. And I guess you would say that's the camp that I am at. Predeterminism. Predeterminism is the idea that all events are determined in advance. Predeterminism is the philosophy that all events of history, past, present, and future, have been decided or are known by God, fate, or some other force, including all human actions. Predeterminism is frequently taken to mean that human actions cannot interfere with or have no bearing on the outcomes of a predetermined course of events. And how does time travel, correspond with this? If everything is predetermined, well, with time travel, if you're going to the future, everything is predetermined from the present. Can't people change their mind in the next 10 or 20 years? Can't they change the future in the next 10 or 20 years? The concept that one's destiny was established externally, for example, exclusively by a creator deity. The concept of predeterminism is often argued by invoking casual determinism, implying that there is an unbroken chain of prior occurrences stretching back to the origin of the universe. In the case of predeterminism, this chain of events has been pre-established, and human actions cannot interfere with the outcomes of the pre-established chain. Predeterminism can be used to mean such pre-established casual determinism, in which case it is categorized as a specific type of determinism. It can also be used interchangeably with determinism in the context of its capacity to determine future events. Despite this, predeterminism is often considered as an independent of casual determinism. The term predeterminism is also frequently used in the context of biology and heredity, in which case it represents a form of biological determinism. So that the predeterminism is something that most this is what the pastor would say, is that what I've heard in many churches, and that everything is predetermined. But compatibilists maintain that determinism is compatible with free will. They believe freedom can be present or absent in a situation for reasons that have nothing to do with metaphysics. For instance, courts of law make judgments about whether individuals are acting under their own free will or under certain circumstances without bringing in metaphysics. Similarly, political liberty is a non-metaphysical concept. Likewise, some compatibilists define free will as freedom to act according to one's determined motives without hindrance from other individuals. So, for example, Aristotle would be an example. To contrast, the incompatibilist positions are concerned with a sort of metaphysical free will, which compatibilists claim have never been coherently defined. All right, free will as a lack of physical restraint. Most classical compatibilists, such as Thomas Hobbes, claims that a person is acting on the person's own will only when it is the desire of the person to do the act, and also possible for the person to be able to do otherwise, if the person had decided to. Hobbes sometimes attributes some compatibilist freedoms to each individual and not to some abstract notion of will, asserting, for example, that no liberty can be afforded to the individual, to the will, desire, or inclination, but the liberty of the man, which coinceth in this, that he finds no stop in doing what he has the will, desire, or inclination to do. Free will as a psychological state. Compatibilism often regards the agent free as virtue of their reason. Some explanations of free will focus on the internal causality of the mind with respect to higher order brain processing, the interaction between conscious and unconscious brain activity. Likewise, some modern compatibilists in psychology have tried to revive traditional accepted struggles of free will with the formation of character. Compatibilist free will also has been attributed to our natural sense of agency, where one must believe they are an agent in order to function and develop a theory of mind. It's hard to believe that we don't have free will. It's hard to some people have studied, some studies have done, and people choose to act immorally if they think that they have free will. But free will appears to be an illusion. Experience teaches us no less clearly than reason that men believe themselves free simply because they are conscious of their actions and unconscious of the causes whereby those actions are determined. So that's Browns on Spinoza and ethics. So Spinoza thought that there was no free will, and it's simply because we're conscious of what we're doing, but we have no ability to choose what we're going to do. David Hume discussed the possibility that the entire debate about free will is nothing more than a merely verbal issue. He suggests that it might be accounted for by a false sensation or seeming experience, which is associated with many of our actions when we perform them. On reflection, we realize that they were necessarily indeterminate all along. So, like, what am I going to have for lunch today? I could cook up a hamburger. I could make some ham and eggs. I could do any of those things, but it's already determined. To me, it feels like I have that choice. But whatever I'm going to cook, you could figure out with a formula, believe it or not. How does this, relate to sport gambling? They're going to have algorithms and AI that are going to be able to predict every sport outcome. If there's no free will, then the results of every NBA champion for the next 50 years. The results. Like, if there's no free will, then what are these general managers doing in baseball and football and basketball? Like, with the NBA draft is in a week, they have to choose whether they're going to take this player or that player, but it's already predetermined. It's hard to wrap your head around that. Like, it doesn't matter what you choose, Spurs. The Spurs are going to choose Victor Wembanyama, right? But what if they just throw in a monkey wrench and they're like, we're going to take someone nobody's ever heard of? Like, that would already be predetermined with all the information. They could figure out if you had a formula, if you had the differential equation, you could figure out exactly who the Spurs were going to pick, or if they weren't going to pick Victor Wembanyama. You could figure out every single pick that every single team was going to make in the entire draft. And maybe this will be the end of gambling. Computers are going to become so strong and so powerful. Maybe it's going to be the end of sports. People are going to stop watching sports because you can, automatically know the result. So we'll wrap this up with a few more ideas about free will. And we went over the Western philosophy. Let's just do briefly on the Eastern philosophy, in particular, the Buddhist philosophy. So Buddhism accepts both freedom and determinism, or something similar to it. But in spite of its focus towards the human agency, it rejects the Western concept of a total agent from external sources. According to the Buddha, there is free action, there is retribution, but I see no agent that passes out from one set of the momentary elements into another one, except the connection of those elements. Buddhists believe in neither absolute free will nor determinism. It preaches a middle doctrine. It's kind of what I'm thinking. And the full name of the Buddhist middle doctrine is Pratityasamutpapada. In Sanskrit, often translate as dependent dependent origination, or dependent arising, or conditional genesis. It teaches that every volition is a conditioned action as a result of ignorance. In part, it states that free will is inherently conditioned and not free to begin with. It is also part of the theory of karma in Buddhism. The concept of karma in Buddhism is different from the notion of karma in Hinduism. In Buddhism, the idea of karma is much less deterministic. The Buddhist notion of karma is primarily focused on the cause and effect of moral actions in this life, while in Hinduism, the concept of karma is more often connected with determining one's destiny in future lives. Let me grab my special black Hindu kitty, Lucky. Lucky. I'm doing the podcast. All right. So, guys, that was the Buddhist philosophy of uh, free will versus fate. Now, I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll talk more about this later. We went over the scientific approach. Um, we'll briefly go with the Hindu philosophy. The six orthodox schools of thought in Hindu philosophy do not agree with each other entirely on the question of free will. For instance, matter is without any freedom, and soul lacks any ability to control the unfolding of matter. The only real freedom consists in realizing the ultimate separateness of matter and self. For the yoga school, only Ishvara is truly free, and its freedom is also distinct from all feelings, thoughts, actions, or wills, and is thus not at all a freedom of will. The metaphysics of the Nyaya and Vashishka schools strongly suggest in belief in determinism, but do not seem to make explicit claims about determinism or free will. A quote from Swami Vendatis offers a good example of the worry about free will in the Hindu tradition. Therefore, we see at once that there cannot be any such thing as free will. The very words are a contradiction because will is what we know, and everything we know is within our universe, and everything within our universe is modeled by conditions of time, space, and casualty. To acquire freedom, we have to get beyond the limitations of this universe, and it cannot be found here. There's many things we do not know. There's many things we do not understand. It's a miracle that we exist. Everybody, the smartest people across this planet, are all at the current consensus in 2023 that we are right on the crest. We are right on the border of some of the greatest breakthroughs in science and in discoveries about the universe, and those are going to be coming within the next few years. And we're all blessed to be alive during this time. And the fact that we are even here, that we are even exist, that our father's sperm found our mother's egg, out of the millions of sperms and millions of trillions of combinations of humans that could have been made, you were made, I was made, we were made, and we are all on this rock in the boondocks of the Milky Way, flinging around a star going 1,000,000 miles per hour. So just stop and take a moment to appreciate that wherever you are on this planet, wherever you are hearing the sound of my voice. Appreciate that we are all alive on this planet, breathing air, feeling sunshine, and enjoying whatever this is that's happening. So everybody have a great Saturday, and I'll see you when I see you. From me and the Street Cats, we bid you an aloha. Shoot!